Charles Darwin, the man who revolutionized our understanding of life. Part 1. Early Life and Formation, 1809 to 1831. On a cold winter day in February 1809, in the market town of Shrewsbury, England, a child was born who would fundamentally transform humanity's understanding of life itself. Charles Robert Darwin entered a world of privilege and intellectual curiosity. Born to Robert Darwin, a wealthy physician, and Susanna Darwin, who sadly would pass away when Charles was only 8 years old. The Darwin family was already notable in scientific circles. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had been a renowned naturalist who had written early works touching on the concept of evolution. Young Charles's early years were shaped by both tragedy and opportunity. The loss of his mother led to a closer relationship with his sisters, who played a significant role in his early education. His family's wealth and social position provided him with access to the best education available, though he would later prove to be an unremarkable student in traditional academic settings. His sisters, particularly his eldest sister Caroline, took on a maternal role, encouraging his curiosity and supporting his early interests in nature and science. The young Darwin showed more interest in collecting beetles, exploring nature, and conducting chemical experiments than in his formal studies. His passion for beetle collecting became almost legendary among his friends and family. He would spend hours searching for rare specimens, even developing innovative techniques for capturing and preserving them. This early fascination with collecting and cataloging would later prove invaluable in his scientific career. Darwin's early formal education at Shrewsbury School, under the headmastership of Samuel Butler, was focused primarily on classics, a subject that held little interest for him. Despite his lackluster academic performance, he showed early signs of the methodical and detailed approach to observation that would later characterize his scientific work. He also developed a reputation for conducting chemical experiments with his brother Erasmus in a makeshift laboratory they created in the garden toolshed. At his father's insistence, Darwin enrolled at Edinburgh University in 1825 to study medicine, following in the footsteps of both his father and grandfather. However, he found himself unable to stomach the brutality of surgery in an era before anesthesia, and his interest in medicine quickly waned. The sight of operations performed without anesthesia, particularly a surgery on a child at the Royal Infirmary, left him deeply disturbed and convinced him that a medical career was impossible. During his time in Edinburgh, however, he found himself drawn to natural history, studying marine invertebrates with Robert Grant and learning taxidermy from John Edmonstone, a freed black slave who had learned his trade in South America. These experiences, though seemingly insignificant at the time, would later prove invaluable during his voyage on the Beagle. Grant introduced Darwin to the ideas of Lamarck regarding the transmutation of species, providing his first exposure to evolutionary concepts. When it became clear that medicine was not his calling, his father suggested an alternative career as an Anglican parson. This led Charles to Christ's College, Cambridge, in 1828. While studying for his Bachelor of Arts degree, Darwin's true scientific education began to take shape, though not in the formal curriculum. His relationship with Professor John Stevens Henslow proved particularly crucial. Henslow, a botanist and mineralogist, became a mentor to Darwin, encouraging his scientific interests and eventually recommending him for the voyage that would change his life. During his Cambridge years, Darwin's passion for natural history intensified. He became an avid beetle collector, even publishing his first scientific notes on his entomological discoveries in Illustrations of British Entomology. His enthusiasm for beetle collecting led to several notable incidents, including once finding 2 rare beetles and, having already filled both hands, attempting to hold a third in his mouth, only to have it spray defensive chemicals, forcing him to spit it out and lose all 3 specimens. Part 2. The Voyage of the Beagle, 1831 to 1836. The defining moment in Darwin's life came through a letter from his mentor Henslow, recommending him for the position of naturalist aboard HMS Beagle. Captain Robert Fitzroy was seeking an educated gentleman naturalist to serve as his companion on a surveying voyage around South America. The position was unpaid, requiring Darwin to rely on his family's resources to fund his participation. Despite initial opposition from his father, who eventually relented thanks to Darwin's uncle, Josiah Wedgwood, Darwin accepted the position, beginning what would become a 5-year journey that would transform both his life and scientific understanding forever. The Beagle departed from Plymouth on December 27, 1831. The ship, a Cherokee-class brig sloop of the Royal Navy, was small and crowded, measuring only 90 feet in length. Darwin's quarters were particularly cramped. He shared the poop cabin with Captain Fitzroy, an arrangement that would lead to both close friendship and occasional tension throughout the voyage. Fitzroy, though brilliant, was known for his mercurial temperament, and the two men occasionally clashed over political and social issues, particularly slavery, which Fitzroy defended and Darwin abhorred. Despite suffering terribly from seasickness, which would plague him throughout the voyage, Darwin threw himself into his roles as naturalist and observer with remarkable enthusiasm. He developed a routine of careful observation and detailed note-taking that would serve him well throughout his career. His cabin became a makeshift laboratory and study, filled with specimens, books, and scientific instruments. The voyage's first major stop was at the Cape Verde Islands, where Darwin made his first significant geological observations. Here, he found marine fossils high above sea level, leading him to contemplate the processes that could lift seabeds to such heights. He began reading Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology, which proposed that geological features were formed through gradual processes over vast periods of time, an idea that would later influence his thinking about biological change. In South America, Darwin spent considerable time on land, making extensive geological observations and collecting countless specimens of plants and animals. His discoveries of fossil remains of extinct mammals, including the giant ground sloth Megatherium and the ancient armadillo-like Glyptodon, sparked his first serious questions about species change over time. The similarity between these extinct creatures and their modern relatives suggested a connection that the prevailing theory of special creation couldn't easily explain. The experience of witnessing an earthquake in Chile in 1835 proved particularly significant. Darwin not only experienced the violent tremors firsthand but observed the aftermath. Raised beaches, elevated mussel beds, and forests of dead trees that had been submerged by the shifting coast. These observations reinforced Lyell's uniformitarian theories and demonstrated to Darwin how dramatic changes could occur through the accumulation of small effects over time. The Galapagos Islands, though occupying only 5 weeks of the 5-year voyage, would later prove crucial to Darwin's theoretical developments. Here, he observed variations among similar species on different islands, particularly among the finches that would later bear his name. He noted how each island's finches showed slight variations in beak size and shape, apparently adapted to different food sources. Though the significance of these variations wouldn't become clear to him until years later, his careful observations and collections provided essential evidence for his theory of evolution. Throughout the voyage, Darwin maintained detailed notebooks and sent regular shipments of specimens back to England. His father had agreed to finance the trip on the condition that someone be appointed to preserve and catalog his collections, and Henslow took on this responsibility. By the end of the voyage, Darwin had sent back 1,529 species, preserved in spirit, and 3,907 labeled skins, bones, and other dried specimens. The voyage also took Darwin to New Zealand and Australia, where he observed more unusual species that would influence his later thinking. The striking differences between the marsupials of Australia and the placental mammals of other continents raised questions about geographical distribution that his future theory would help explain. Between ports, Darwin spent his time cataloging specimens, writing detailed notes, and enduring the challenges of life at sea. He developed his skills as a naturalist, learning taxidermy, dissection, and microscopy. He also honed his writing abilities, sending long letters home that would later form the basis of his published account of the voyage. The Beagle's return journey took it across the Indian Ocean, stopping at the Cocos, Keeling Islands, where Darwin developed his theory about the formation of coral atolls. This work, published several years after his return, established his reputation as a geologist even before his biological theories became known. By the time the Beagle returned to England on October 2, 1836, Darwin had transformed from an amateur naturalist into a seasoned scientific observer. The voyage had provided him with a global perspective on geology, biology, and the distribution of species that few naturalists of his time possessed. More importantly, it had filled his notebooks with observations and questions that would take him decades to fully understand and explain. Part 3. Development of Evolutionary Theory, 1836 to 1859. Upon his return to England in 1836, Darwin began what would become 23 years of careful work developing his theory of evolution. His reputation as a naturalist was quickly established through the publication of his Journal of Researches, later known as the Voyage of the Beagle, and his work on coral reef formation. However, his most significant theoretical work was developing in private through a series of secret notebooks. The immediate years following his return were filled with intense activity. Darwin moved between London and Cambridge, working to distribute his specimen collections to various experts for proper identification and description. His fossil mammals were given to Richard Owen, then Britain's leading comparative anatomist, whose identification of the specimens helped establish Darwin's reputation in scientific circles. By July 1837, Darwin had begun his first notebook on transmutation of species, having become convinced that species could change over time. His initial insights came from studying his Galapagos specimens, particularly after learning from ornithologist John Gould that what he had thought were different species of birds were actually varieties of finches. This revelation, combined with similar patterns among mockingbirds and tortoises from different islands, suggested that species could change to suit their environments. Darwin's reading of Thomas Malthus's essay on the principle of population in September 1838 provided the crucial insight into the mechanism of natural selection. Malthus's ideas about population pressure and resource competition helped Darwin understand how favorable variations could be preserved while unfavorable ones would be eliminated. This eureka moment gave him the theoretical framework he needed to explain how species could change over time. During this period of intense theoretical development, Darwin's personal life also underwent significant changes. In 1839, he married his cousin Emma Wedgwood, with whom he would have 10 children. Their marriage was marked by deep mutual affection but also by tension over religious beliefs. Emma was deeply religious, while Charles's work was leading him toward agnosticism. In 1842, they moved to Down House in Kent, where Darwin would spend the rest of his life. Despite chronic ill health that frequently left him debilitated, Darwin conducted extensive research on numerous topics that would support his theory. His 8-year study of barnacles, published between 1851 and 1854, gave him crucial insights into species variation and classification. He conducted countless experiments on plant breeding and seed dispersal, established a worldwide network of correspondence, and meticulously documented evidence supporting his ideas. Part 4. The Path to Publication, 1858 to 1859. The publication of On the Origin of Species was dramatically accelerated by the arrival of a paper from Alfred Russel Wallace in June 1858. Wallace, working in the Malay archipelago, had independently developed ideas very similar to Darwin's about natural selection. This created a crisis for Darwin, who had been slowly working on his big book about evolution for 20 years. The solution came through Darwin's friends Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, who arranged for a joint presentation of papers by Darwin and Wallace at the Linnean Society on July 1, 1858. This preserved Darwin's priority while acknowledging Wallace's independent discovery. The papers generated little immediate response, but they set the stage for Darwin to publish his theory. Darwin then began what he called an abstract of his larger work, writing at a feverish pace to present his theory before anyone else could publish similar ideas. This abstract would become On the Origin of Species, published on November 24, 1859. The first edition of 1,250 copies sold out immediately, and the book would go through 6 editions during Darwin's lifetime, each incorporating responses to critics and new evidence. Part 5. The Impact of Origin and Later Work, 1859 to 1882. The publication of Origin sparked an immediate and intense debate. While some religious leaders and conservatives were hostile to the theory, many scientists quickly accepted the idea of evolution, though natural selection as the mechanism remained controversial for several decades. The book's clear prose and careful argumentation made it accessible to both scientific and general audiences. Thomas Henry Huxley, who would become known as Darwin's Bulldog, emerged as a powerful advocate for the theory, particularly in public debates. The most famous of these was his 1860 Oxford debate with Bishop Samuel Wilberforce, which became a symbolic victory for scientific naturalism over religious authority. Darwin continued his research and publishing after Origin, producing several important works that extended his theory. The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, 1868. The Descent of Man, 1871. The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, 1872. The Effects of Cross and Self-Fertilization in the Vegetable Kingdom, 1876. The Power of Movement in Plants, 1880. The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, 1881. These works addressed various aspects of evolution and natural selection, with The Descent of Man particularly controversial for its explicit application of evolutionary theory to human beings. Part 6. Legacy and Modern Relevance. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has become the cornerstone of modern biology. The discovery of DNA and the development of genetics have provided mechanisms for heredity and variation that Darwin could only hypothesize. The modern evolutionary synthesis, developed in the early 20th century, combines Darwin's insights with genetics, paleontology, and molecular biology to provide a comprehensive understanding of life's diversity. Darwin's influence extends far beyond biology. His ideas have influenced fields as diverse as psychology, economics, and computer science. The concept of natural selection has been applied metaphorically to understanding cultural change, technological development, and even the evolution of ideas themselves. In medicine, evolutionary principles help explain the development of antibiotic resistance and guide research into cancer treatment. In conservation biology, understanding evolutionary relationships helps prioritize species protection efforts. In agriculture, evolutionary principles guide crop breeding and pest management strategies. Part 7. Contemporary Perspectives. Today, Darwin's work continues to generate new insights and applications. The field of evolutionary developmental biology, evo-devo, has revealed how changes in developmental genes can produce major evolutionary innovations. Epigenetics has shown how environmental factors can influence gene expression across generations. The Human Genome Project and advances in DNA sequencing have provided unprecedented evidence for evolutionary relationships among species. While religious opposition to evolution continues in some quarters, many religious leaders and thinkers have found ways to reconcile evolutionary theory with religious faith. Darwin's personal struggle with religious belief and his careful consideration of the philosophical implications of his theory remain relevant to contemporary discussions of science and religion. Climate change research relies heavily on evolutionary principles to understand how species might adapt to changing environments. The emergence of new diseases, including viral mutations, is studied through an evolutionary lens. Even artificial intelligence researchers use evolutionary algorithms inspired by Darwin's ideas. Darwin's legacy reminds us that scientific discoveries can fundamentally change how we understand ourselves and our place in the natural world. His work continues to inspire new generations of scientists and thinkers to explore the complexities of life and its development over time. The endurance of Darwin's ideas and their continuing relevance to contemporary issues in science, philosophy, and society demonstrate the profound impact one careful observer can have on human understanding. His combination of bold theoretical thinking and meticulous attention to evidence provides a model for how transformative scientific work can be accomplished. If you found this exploration of Darwin's life and revolutionary ideas inspiring, please support our channel by subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Share this video with others who might be interested in understanding how one man's careful observations and bold thinking changed our understanding of life itself forever. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated on our future explorations of history's most influential scientific minds.